The Charles Adler Show starts now.
Wow. She is a singer and songwriter and producer. But the reason she's on is because we're buds. Someday we'll even have a cup of coffee or a drink. Jann Arden in Alberta, welcome to the Charles Adler Show podcast.
This is becoming a habit now.
Well, yeah, twice, I think, in 3 weeks. So, yeah, that would be...
That's great. And I bet you we still have lots to talk about.
We do. Well, last time I was on yours, you've got the great iHeart podcast available on iHeart or wherever you get your podcast for Jann Arden. And we talked a little bit about the cause that is represented in the hat that you're wearing for people who are listening and not watching. Jann is wearing a horseshit hat. That it's not about her being cynical. It's about her being hopeful that the particular cause that she and I and many other Canadians thankfully support, and I think we've got people from around the world in support, is to get some of the horse shit out of politics, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But there's no way that I'm not leading off this discussion, Jann, with your thoughts. Go as long as you want. Please, whatever you're feeling about Sinead O'Connor.
Oh, gosh. First of all, I wish people would support each other and say kind things when people are alive. She has been struggling with mental illness and lots of other issues for, probably since she ripped the picture of the Pope in half. People were extremely unkind to her. And it's always that rose-colored glasses thing when people pass away. It's like, what an extraordinary artist and what an icon and what a trailblazer and what a this and that and the other thing. And, really, she's been sitting in the darkness for a long time with really nobody saying anything. I watched her documentary several months ago, and I commented on Twitter just how fantastic she was and how fantastic the documentary was and what a reminder it was of just what an extraordinary thing happened really in the late 80s when she really was catapulted almost instantaneously with Nothing Compares to You, which of course was penned by the also passed over Prince. And it just was an international phenomenon. This beautiful woman with her short, hair and singing this song directly to the camera, and it captivated an entire world about the emotions of a breakup and loss and all those things. And I don't know how anyone, Charles, can prepare themselves for that kind of instantaneous fame. And anyway, it really is. It's a tragedy. She lost her son 18 months ago, and I cannot fathom the depths of whatever she was going through. I can only speculate. I never met her. I didn't know her. I only appreciated her, of course, from the distance.
So when she ripped that picture of the Pope on Saturday Night Live and was never invited back to Saturday Night Live and was really excoriated even by fans. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation, Jann, where an arena or a stadium full of fans are booing you, but I can't even imagine what that's like for a performer. But what people paid very little attention to, even then, was why she ripped the picture. She ripped the picture because there were confirmed reports of not a few, but of tens of thousands of young people abused in the worst way possible by the Roman Catholic Church. The Pope is the head of the church. It wasn't personal between her and the person who happened to be the Pope. It was about abuse. Why was she abused for doing that?
Well, the interesting thing also, further to that, the picture she ripped up was the actual photograph that hung on her mother's wall. She suffered abuse from the time she was a very, very little girl. And, here we are all these years later, and she was right. She continues to be right. Her statement was correct. Catholicism is broken, as far as I'm concerned. It certainly doesn't represent everybody or every priest or every person that is involved in the church, but there is a large number of men to this day that go unpunished. I don't think the Catholic Church has really ever fully come forward and apologized and made, some kind of compensation for, like you said, the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people that have been sexually abused over the last 1,000 years. Like, I don't even know where to begin. But that is religion. We can point fingers at Catholicism, but it's so widespread. And poor Sinead stood very bravely and boldly, and you got to hand it to her. She stood for what she believed. She stuck her neck out. She did it unapologetically, and that's what artists do, and that's what they've done, for time immemorial. Is they've made statements, they've made political statements, they've told stories, they've expressed about injustice, and she was right.
And it should be pointed out, I guess, if we're discussing this, that she too was abused severely in a setting, in a school setting, a school that was run by nuns.
Yeah. Oh no, she came from so much sorrow. Maybe that's why we heard it in her voice. I mean, she had an unmistakable style. She had moments of like extreme sort of volatility on stage. Her live performances were exciting. I've seen so much footage of her over the years. But I remember, I hadn't signed my record deal yet at that time. I was a few years later. But watching her in a sea of what was really happening at the time was the grunge scene on the West Coast. It was Nirvana and Pearl Jam, and it was all these young, angsty guys with their straggly hair and singing rock and roll and singing about, the corporations, man, like down with the world. And Sinead, if you want to look at Alanis Morissette, Celine Dion, in modern times, Beyonce, Madonna, all these people that she just blasted all the doors off of every building, because she was really genreless and she was powerful and she wasn't hypersexualized as we came to see in the 90s with Aguilera and Britney Spears, and really every woman that's come along that was not yet 20 years old, so highly sexualized. And Sinead wasn't. She was beautiful, but she almost removed all the stuff that men could penalize her for, which is like long flowing locks and big boobs and big hips. And, she was so sexy and so, but because of power and because of integrity, intelligence, and her smart. So she was one of a kind. And like I said at the top of the show, I wish people would be complimentary and supportive and shower praise on artists that really deserve it. And on the day after they die, we see the pictures and the praise, and she was so great, she was this, and honest to God, it just makes me so mad.
Jann, have you ever written from pain, performed on the stage from pain? There are people who think that pain is the greatest motivator. I never want to believe that, but I do believe that pain can make a person want to write some things down and perhaps sing them.
Yeah, I think that's a general motivation for most artists, certainly the ones that I know. It's there's a lot of joy too, but anyone that listens to my music, Charles, I'm always like, God, she's so depressing and blah. And I don't find it depressing. I find it so joyful and so uplifting to hear anything. Sorry, that's me. I'll hit my mute. Stop it. Focus. Get it in here. Do not disturb me. Yeah, I just find so much joy in anything in a minor key, like any kind of symphony stuff, or who doesn't love an opera with the aria that comes, near the end of the show, where you're just like, oh my God, my heart's getting ripped out because someone's going to be murdered or died or buried, or a breakup or unrequited love. And I am a sucker for that stuff. I really don't want to hear summer jams on a regular basis. I'd rather be listening to Simon and Garfunkel, who bring me so much joy, that kind of music. But yeah, I write about personal things, and I think people take my stuff a little more seriously than even I do sometimes. They really want to know, what's it about? I'm like, I have no damn idea.
Can singing remove the pain?
Oh, I love to sing. I don't sing as much as I used to. In my 20s, I was obsessed, but I think singing is very good for people. I think it's a very old, it's been with us probably since human beings plopped out onto the planet. I think every species is musical. I mean, who doesn't love birdsong and who doesn't love, a whale singing and all the great sounds in nature that really give us these deep rooted feelings of kind of belonging and that we're not alone here spinning through the universe. I think singing's so great. And a lot of people are like, oh, I don't sing because I can't sing. I'm a terrible singer. And it doesn't matter how good or bad you are. I'm not the greatest singer in the world. I sing. I have my own peculiar little way of doing it, but I sure as hell am not Adele or any of those girls that are so proficient and can just bend a note into this shard of light that is almost blinding. I think I'm average at what I do, but I think I've been absolutely consistent and persistent and resilient, and I do what I do. And that's the thing about being a musician. You don't have to be Adele to make it. Thank God.
Okay, so Jan, sorry, I got to put up the Canadian stop sign here.
What's happening?
I don't want to arrest the guest in her tracks, but they're self-deprecating and then they're self-immolating. You're a terrific singer. You inspire people around the world. We are so proud of you as a Canadian, and of course, as a performer, I'm proud of you as a fellow performer. And someday a coffee date. But please,
sure.
please, this business of you just being an average performer,
But
stop.
but I'm being very earnest, and I don't compare myself to other people. Like, I don't look at other people and go, I wish. I've never been that person. I was a 10-year-old, 11-year-old in my parents' basement, picking up my mom's old crappy guitar in the corner. My dad was an alcoholic, so we were out in the sticks. It's not like I could walk to the bowling alley and meet my friends. I had nowhere to walk to. We used to have cow patty fights in the fields. I mean, this is the kind of past activities we partook in after school. You want to go throw some shit around? Yeah, sure. I'll meet you at the end of the field. And so when I discovered music in my parents' basement, and we were very proud members of the Columbia Record Club, I might add, which was a kind of a crapshoot. Yeah, you get to pick 10 records for a penny. And then every month after that, you just got what they sent to you. And if you didn't want it, you sent it back, which was a huge rigmarole, if you can remember back to that. But what happened is that we were getting records like Sammy Davis Jr. and James Taylor and Jethro Tull and the Tijuana Brass, like records I would never have. Etta James, Aretha Franklin, the Supremes, the Mills Brothers. This is the mid 70s, and my mind exploded because I was exposed to so much music. So I just made my way. To this day, I don't read music. I don't transcribe it. I don't understand the notation. I never learned that. So I feel a little dumb sometimes that I didn't learn that. But I've had lots of people say, you don't need to do that. Just keep doing what you're doing. But yeah, I honestly, I know what my skill set is, and I'm good at what I do, but in comparison on a global scale, my God, you listen to these voices out there, and I'm just so inspired. I'm still learning at 61. I'm still trying to figure out how to write songs. And that is a never ending path that we walk. And I think I will write music till the day I die. I'll probably be whistling a tune. Hopefully the last thing that comes out of my head will be, my last breath will be a note of some kind, like, that'll be my last call out into the universe.
That's your way of saying, no, I'm not throwing shit around anymore. It's over.
That's it. I'm throwing my last cow patty.
So, Jann, when you listened to Sammy Davis Jr., did you ever say to yourself, I need to cover Mr. Bojangles?
Well, I loved that, but I loved the Candyman can, because he mixes it with love and makes the world taste good. I was just like, holy moly. And he was fascinating to me, part of the Rat Pack and really pushing the boundaries. I mean, you think back in the 60s of what diversity did not look like. This black diminutive man that was blind in one eye that had been dancing on the street since he was 3 years old. He was extraordinary to me. A lot of people, obviously younger than we are, Charles, wouldn't remember. He really was the Stevie Wonder of his time. He broke so many barriers. He was in movies. He was a star. He had that black eye patch for a while. He was a badass guy, and he could sing and dance and entertain, and he was funny, and he held his own with, Peter Lawford and Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. He held his own, and he inspired a lot of Black people, in the entertainment business. So yeah, stuff like that we got from the Columbia Record Club was an eye opener for this stupid white kid on the prairies that really hadn't been exposed to anything or any kind of diversity. And that's the truth.
Well, this stupid white kid got to interview Sammy Davis Jr. in the 1970s.
Oh my God!
In Montreal, and got to see him rehearse and, of course, perform to
Wow.
the show, all that. But the part that I'll never forget, and that goes to what you're talking about, Jann, is I asked Sammy Davis Jr. in the interview, and I turned the tape recorder on and I asked him what it is about Canada that he loves so much, because he clearly was just one of the more pro-Canadian Americans that I had ever met. And he said the reason he loved Canada is because Canada was the first place where he got to sleep in the hotel that he played. And some people today don't really understand what that means. So in just plain Canadian, it means that in all these fancy places that he played in the United States, he was told, it's still difficult for me to say it after all these years, it's still painful. After he did one of those 2-3 hour shows where there's not a dry eye in the house, standing ovation, greatest thing anyone has ever experienced, he's told by the people who own the place to get the hell out and go to the black side of town to stay in a black motel, because he may be one of the greatest entertainers on earth, but he's not white enough to stay in the hotel.
Well, shame. And I don't know if we've really come all that far from perceptions. I mean, we're seeing things today in real time with the LGBTQ community. We're seeing things, obviously the war between Ukraine and Russia, that, has a lot to do with cultural identity. Really at the heart of it, we want all of this to be Russian. We want kids to go to Russian schools, and we want them to speak Russian. And, I think at the heart of it is still bathed and drenched in hatred and resentment and not wanting anything different and wanting, that's what it's all about. It's wanting people to think like you think and wear what you wear and look how you look. And, all the stuff against the drag queens. You and I spoke about that when you were on my podcast. And, I don't know how much has changed. And it's really disappointing.
Every time I think we've hit the bottom, I say to myself, I can't believe this is being said. And this week in the United States, as you know, Jann, there's a debate about whether or not blacks, whether or not they benefited from slavery. Serious people are discussing that.
I don't know where people have fallen off the cliff, where they get these ideas, how they even have the audacity to speak them out loud like there's something credible, that there's a shred of truth in any of it. It's I just have to somehow find a way to think that there are more good people in the world than bad. It comes from such stupidity and such racism, and I don't know how Black people even put up with it. BIPOC people, the LGBT community. I just don't know. I keep waiting for some kind of uprising to happen where these people are just permanently silenced somehow. But it's an ongoing thing with people's, they live in a place of hatred. Like I said, they want you to think like them, be like them, look like them, read what they read. That's where the whole book banning thing comes from, is no, you'll read what we read. Oh, you can think how you want, but you have to think like us. Like, they actually think that's some distorted, perverted form of freedom. And that's the whole freedom thing movement here. You know, when I was stopped at the border in Coots, going down there with my friend Leah to drive to Palm Springs, we'd had this trip planned for a long time. I had a little dog with me, and we had our car all packed up, and there we were. I've never been so frightened in my life. You know, there was trucks that went back a mile. I had to laugh at the pink porta potties in the ditch, and the barbecues set up, and these guys, you know, grilling and laughing and drinking their beers, and when we went by, people giving us the finger as we drove down, and had the RCMP take our passports and escort us to the border with an RCMP car driving us this 800 yards to the border. I felt like I was in Berlin in 1939. It was so weird. And I'm like, you are actually going to sit there and say you're doing this for me? You're doing this for my benefit because I deserve to have freedom? You have just stripped me of any freedom that I had experienced, and you're scaring the shit out of me on top of it. It was a weird day, and anyone that thinks that what that was anything but, I don't know, just horrific. It was a horrific example, if that's what people really think freedom is.
Well, over the years, unfortunately, many people have called it many things. They've worn different uniforms, they've had different slogans, but very often so-called freedom fighters weren't about giving you freedom. They were about giving themselves as much freedom as possible to snuff yours. So it's a really bad joke.
It is a bad joke, but I never in my lifetime thought I'd ever experience that 300 kilometers from where I live. And just going by those 18-wheelers, and it was just so discouraging and so disappointing. And they don't know me from anything. They certainly didn't know it was me with my friend Leah in the car. But the way they looked at us, like we were doing something so horrible by going over that border with our, you know, we had our vaccination stuff. We were all ready to go. I mean, that probably in and of itself was like enough to send them. But just their giddy joy at their sense of power that particular day was interesting to look at. Their giddy joy of suppressing and making somebody else afraid was something I'll never forget as long as I live.
Jann, is it easier to love animals than people?
Oh my God, yes. I love them. I woke up to deer and foxes this morning. I have a crazy fat single bachelor pheasant that's wandering around my yard who's hilarious. I'm very blessed to live in a place where I experience nature, Charles. It's really incredible.
So let's talk about the horseshit cause, which is anything but horseshit.
Yeah, we had an interesting meeting yesterday with a member of parliament. He's from Kitchener, Tim Lewis, and he is presenting in September when the House of Commons goes back into session a bill to ban live horse export. And there's also one of his colleagues in the Senate that's also presenting a similar bill to ban live horse export. And, you know, I was really tickled to ask Tim when we connected finally, because he had presented the bill to the House before it went into recess for the summer. And he sent me a number through social media, the wonders of social media. And we spoke last week, and I asked him, how did you hear about the live horse experts, Mr. Lewis? And he said, through the horseshit campaign. And I was so touched, you know, his daughter and his wife, and we had a long conversation about it. And as you know, I did get a chance to meet with Prime Minister Trudeau several weeks ago when I was performing in Ottawa for Canada Day. He went to great lengths to track me down. His office did anyway, not him per se, but they went to the record company. Then the record company went to my management company, and then my management company tracked down my road manager. And they said, "Can you meet the Prime Minister in 45 minutes?" And I just hoofed it, down the street. I was soaking wet when I got there. But Prime Minister Trudeau took the time to explain to me what a private member's bill was and how it was going to be a lot faster than the mandate that he had obviously proposed when he was elected. But he was absolutely supportive and said it was a money grab and that it's something that shouldn't be happening in Canadian agriculture, and that it's just that this was something I could be optimistic about. So that's where we're at. The campaign, I think, has been successful in as much as it's raised the awareness probably from about 5% of the population to 60 or 70% of the population being aware of Canada exporting large draft horses in aircrafts 8,000 kilometers to their demise in Japan a couple of times a month. Hundreds of horses go out.
Can you give us any sense of what that feels like for the horse to be transported in that way? I just want you to take some time to let people know just how GD abusive this is.
Well, it starts out bad. They're purpose bred. And so in layman's terms, these horses, the brood mares, they're impregnated. These horses, these foals drop into a feedlot without any veterinary care into, a foot of shit. These feedlots you can see from drones. They're massive. They're in Alberta and they're in Manitoba now as well. They're born there. They're very fast tracked. They don't ever get to run in grass. This is mud and hell and large high fences, and they're fed a sludge every day that, and 18 months later, there's an inspector that comes from Japan and he marks on the horse's rear ends with a white chalk thing or which ones that they want. And they're the ones that now, after a year and a half of living in hell, they now are put into 18-wheeler trucks. They're scared senseless. They've never seen anything else but the feedlots. So they're hit, whacked, prodded, poked. Reluctantly, 80 or 90 of them are put into these trucks. And now they're looking at a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever hour haul. It all depends on weather, traffic, everything else. No food, no water. Here's where it starts. There's no food or no water. At that point, they arrive either in Calgary, Edmonton, or Winnipeg, and they are loaded onto wooden crates. If they're more than like 16, 15 hands, they're supposed to be in their own crates. That never happens. They never follow the regulations, and the Canadian government does nothing to make sure those regulations are met. And that has been a problem for the last 15 years. They don't meet the regulations, even the basic things for these animals. So now they are in the crates. It could be 35 below, as you know, in Alberta, or it could be 35 above. There is delays. There's everything else. They sit in the crates. Still no food, no water. They're kicking at the crates. They're foaming at the mouth. They're terrified. They're sitting on the tarmacs usually. They lift them with forklifts, and they sit beside a very, very large aircraft, and they wait. They wait. They wait. They're panicked. They're finally, after freezing their asses off or cooking to death, are loaded into a large aircraft. No food, no water still. And we could very well be at the 10, 12, 14-hour mark at this point. Now they have a 14-hour journey across the Pacific Ocean to a small island off the island of Japan. It's not like the pilot can come on and say, "Hey guys, hunker down. We're going to hit turbulence for 25 minutes. The center of gravity of a horse is forward. They have very large heads. They hang far over their front legs. Their center of gravity is not like us. Anything sends them. The slightest anything, and they fall over on their comrades. They can never right themselves. They don't report half the deaths on these planes. Still no food or water. Now they're unloaded at the other side. We have no idea really how long the loads could take. They could be in those crates another 6, 7, 8 hours after their long journey and after being on the plane. And what they're met with is a hideous butchering. It's a very, because of the way these horses are served, they're big horses because of the musculature. They're eaten raw in something called bashimi. And it's by very wealthy people. I'll tell you right now, this is not a Japanese stable of a Japanese family's household. It's not something they regularly eat. I would liken it to how horse is consumed, uh, by people in Quebec. It's the older generation, and in France, that's something that's been going on. And trust me, as the newer kids come up through the ranks, it becomes less and less and less of something that people eat. But that's not even our issue. It's the live horse export. I don't care what you eat. I don't care how often you eat, whatever it is that you want to do, but you don't put a frightened, indentured horse that has really lived a life of hell and put them on a plate, halfway across the world. It's everything that we're told not to do. The climate crisis, lowering our carbon footprint, eating less meat, eating local. This is the antithesis. Live horse export is the antithesis of what we need to do as a global community to alleviate what we are seeing: flooding, fires, people dying like flies, tornadoes that we've never seen happen in communities we've never seen before. Like, we are causing this.
Jann, I hate to ask, but I have to, in order to get the message driven home to people about how there's just so much horseshit involved in this so-called industry. How are the horses slaughtered before they're butchered, or are they even slaughtered before they're butchered?
Yeah, because of the nature of how the meat is eaten and how it needs to kind of be plated, it's a very immediate, right? This horse meat has to be eaten within 24 hours. But the horse's heart is still beating. They're hung upside down, and they're stunned some of the time, half of the time not, and their heart needs to be beating through the meat as they're carving it off the horse. So it is nothing you ever want to look up or Google or anything of the sort. They're very clandestine about the footage. Horses of this size are huge. You would have to be up on a footstool or a ladder, and you'd have to probably have the chains or whatever in place when you're bolting them to get them up into the air to put them upside down. So, and they know exactly what's happening. And it's funny because if you see any of the ads for horses in Japan or in Korea, where the horses are eaten, there's these beautifully crafted posters of horses with long manes running through fields of grass. And it's like we do with the cattle industry here: grass-fed, hormone-free, blah, 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 blah. They all die the same at the end of the day. It doesn't matter how you look at it. But the thing of it is that the marketing, I mean, the cattle, like the petroleum in Canada, is very heavily subsidized. Agriculture is very heavily subsidized. And but if we don't start changing the perception, I don't know how anything's going to get better. It's just so immoral, I think, on many ways. And I'm so sick of the circle of life conversation. And it really is a terrible, terrible life in industrial agriculture. And the horses are a tiny shard of it, and it's something that it's something that Canada doesn't need to be involved in. And really, if wealthy clients in any country over there, they have every right to eat what they want. I'm never saying that, but you probably should raise horses domestically. I think it would be a heck of a lot easier on them. And I think devising, a better system. If they want to have this as part of, a delicacy for food, I think they should be raised there and be hard on their own land, use their own resources and water. But flying horses 8,000 kilometers it's repugnant.
Jann, for people who want to be supportive of this cause, what do they do right now?
Well, awareness is everything. Horseshit.ca. If you go to horseshit.com, it's a porn site. I'll warn you now. Look out. It's a porn site. Young people doing things that you don't want to see. You cannot help us at horseshit.com.
Horseshit.ca. All right, horseshit. We'll just emphasize that. Horseshit.ca for much more on this.
And donations, T-shirts, the hat that I have on, they're all just really, we want to be human billboards. That's what our site's about. 100% of the proceed goes to help horses, lots of rescues and sanctuaries we're already helping. And we're putting in place a plan to help the horses, between 8 and 12,000 horses that are part of the live export flock right now, at different various points. And if this bill does pass, we want to be ready to help the horses, because people always say, Charles, well, what happens, when the exports stop? What are you going to do with the horses? Well, we are ready. We're making ourselves ready with sanctuaries, rescues, adoptions. We want to have the finances to help people take horses on and give them the lives that they deserve.
Jann, the other day I was watching Katie Lang performing in tribute to Tony Bennett passing, and she did an incredible job, as she always does, no matter who she's covering. And she was covering a Tony Bennett classic. But I couldn't help but feel, as a Canadian, especially one who launched a talk radio career in 1990 in Alberta, how many Albertans were feeling about Katie Lang. They weren't proud, they were embarrassed, and this was because of Katie Lang's decision in those days, being very ahead of her time, to be a vegetarian and come out against the slaughtering of animals. A tough thing to do in Alberta in 1990. Is it tough to do what you're doing in Alberta in 2023?
No, I oddly enough, Charles, we were talking about this yesterday with the Member of Parliament, Tim Lewis. And, he was just kind of preparing himself for his bill. And I said, Tim, I have not had one, and I mean it, Charles, not one word from the other side of the fence, the exporters, because it is indefensible. So when you're doing something that's indefensible, when you're giving people facts, when you're telling them exactly what happens, when you are researched, when you are measured, when you have done your homework, there's nothing they can come back with. There was one older gentleman that was representing them several years ago when W5 did a piece on the horseshit cause, the exports. And he came on with his, sadly enough, he was a white guy with a cowboy hat, about 75 years old. And he said, those horses, they like going. They get on there, no problem, and they sleep the whole way. I'm like, are you out of your fucking mind? What are you talking about? But this is how blind these guys are. They are not going to give up their 20 or 25 million bucks a year. Like everybody else in the world that had to modify their business model, like every artist in the world, movies that are streaming, musics that are streaming, artists that lost everything, labels that literally fired tens of thousands of people because the industry changed. My industry changed and I had to adapt. These guys have to adapt. It's over. The time of picking up a very large animal and flying it across the world is over. And Canada needs to lead the way. We are one of the last countries in the world doing live horse exports. Brazil, New Zealand, Australia, even those countries that are renowned for sending massive amounts of sheep and lambs to the Middle East. 40,000 animals at a time on a freighter ship for 3 weeks at sea in crates. And they find 25% loss acceptable throwing these animals into the ocean. 25% of 40,000 animals is an acceptable loss. So they're banning it. They're banning the live exports of animals. This is really going to be known as a time in human history that is so really unmodern and unfeeling, and we can't let this stuff go unchallenged. And I know there are so many good people out there. Even if you are a meat eater, there's still people that cringe at the thought of how it's done, and they're making better decisions for themselves. Like if you even give yourself a couple of plant-based meals a week, my God, the lives that you're saving. So it's not this all or nothing thing, Charles. And I don't want to sit here and say, damn it, it's an all or nothing thing. I don't believe that. But we have to make changes in how we're eating because it's going to affect the planet.
Jann, there are people who say, even in 2023, I wish performers, I wish actors, I wish singers would just act and sing and not chew the fat about politics and have causes. And I wish they wouldn't take advantage of their position in life. We want them to sing and act, but we don't want to hear about their causes. There's still a number of people who talk that way, and I wonder if you'd give us an opportunity to hear Jann Arden talking back.
every single person that has the ability to vote is a political person. The milkman's political, I'm political. Politicians are probably the least political people there are. Democracy is about raising your voice. And if you were around in the 50s and 60s and the 70s, the needle was moved in human rights, in racism, in the early Black movement with Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, people marching in Selma, people that were making a difference with how human beings were treated, were everyday people, musicians, Joan Baez and Bob Dylan and Peter, Paul and Mary, people who sang predominantly political songs, socially charged songs. They were the people that moved the needles. They were the people that told the stories. And I have no intention of ever backing down, in honor of someone like Sinead O'Connor, who, with that simple action on Saturday Night Live in the 90s, really changed the course of history and started a conversation that never, ever ended. She opened a door that never, ever closed again. And the Catholic Church couldn't deny it. The people couldn't deny it. People came forward by the thousands to speak about their own stories. Musicians are important. Artists are important. They're storytellers. They're the people that travel the country. Musicians, I've been to more places in Canada than probably any prime minister ever. Ask that of Blue Rodeo. Ask that of Great Big Sea. Ask that of, the late, great Gordon Lightfoot. We play every small town, every nook and cranny, every place we go. And we open our guitar case and we tell our stories to people. And we talk about what we see and what we experience and what we feel. And we share those stories. Sometimes it's hopeful, sometimes it's sad, but it's always honest. And it's always take me or leave me. People don't have to buy my records. They can shut me off when they hear me on the radio, but they sure as hell can't shut me off in my own life. That's never going to happen.
Jann, we all stand on the shoulders of giants, no matter what industry we're in. And some of us are fortunate enough to have giants standing on our shoulders. For me, it's my dad, Mike Adler, and I have a feeling that for you, it's Mum.
Yes, very much so. She's my true north. My friend Nigel in England got me a weather vane a few years ago, and I finally got it up in my yard this year. He's like, "Are you ever going to put that bloody weather vane up?" And it's standing in my yard where Mum's house was, because they had a little house here on their property for about 10 years before they both passed away. And of course, modern days, you can pick a house up and move it. and other people are living in it somewhere about 60 kilometers from here. But I look out at that weather vane all the time. And my mom was my true north. She was extremely economical. She wasn't religious a person, although she was spiritual. I mean, she told me that, your soul is your pilot and your body is your spaceship. I mean, this was well into Alzheimer's, but it stayed with me. Like, yeah, your body's your spaceship, but your soul is your pilot. And when you leave here, you got to leave your spaceship. You got to leave it. You got to leave your body back here, but your soul can go wherever. And she was extremely optimistic. I'd be happy sitting in a field on an apple crate. And that can-do spirit was indelible with me. She always said, "You're just as good as anybody else." And I believed her. I believed her. I had boyfriends and girlfriends growing up. And I'm sure it was kind of confusing for my mom, who were, it's a certain generation. And even my dad, who was this staunch kind of rough and tough, swearing. It was almost like my mom married a sailor, although there wasn't any water within 1,000 kilometers of us. I remember her telling, I broke up with a girlfriend and I had phoned my mom crying, and I was young, I was in my maybe late teens, early 20s. And, in our house, my dad would always pick up the extension and he'd be chatting away, or you could hear him breathing. And I think he'd been listening to me talking to my mom. And he said to me, Jann, we would love you if you were pink with purple spots. And it launched me into a life where there was an absence of doubt, because my parents legitimized my normalcy and my ability to make my way through the world as exactly who I was, unapologetically, to speak my mind. And my mom said, it's not always going to be easy, but she said the best things aren't easy. And she said the obstacles are what are going to give you character. And so as much as my dad was a fucking thorn in my side for many years, alcoholism is tough. He, with that sentence, gave me a license to fly almost. I can't even explain it. So yeah, pretty incredible to have parents, Charles, that just show us a way that isn't easy. And I don't think the next 20 years is going to be easy if I'm lucky enough to live that long. But I am not going to stop advocating for things that I think are important and worth fighting for.
Well, Jann, as you know, I don't think it's anybody's business to tell you who to love and how many to love. I know that I love you, and I know that hundreds of thousands of people in this country feel exactly the same way.
I love you, Charles. Let's, I do. We're kindred spirits, and you inspire me all the time. Your stance on Twitter and the way that you deal with people is bold, and we have to choose a way. So thank you for enabling me to continue on with my voice, because I never feel alone out there. I'm like, Adler's out here. He's kicking ass today.
Listen, someday we're going to have that coffee. My only regret is that I don't get to have it with you and your mom, because I just think that would be the happiest hour in my life.
Well, it really is too bad, but she's around, and hopefully I'm representing, down here representing my parents. I'm sure they're rolling their eyeballs half the time. My God, well, I didn't mean to do that. Or is that what you're going to wear today? My mom would always say that. You're not going to the grocery store wearing that. And I don't blame her. Sometimes I look at myself and I'm like, wow, you really have to make an effort here. But anyway, it's always great talking to you, and we'll just keep on keeping on. There's a lot of joy in the world, a lot of good people, a lot of optimism, and I believe we can turn the ship around. And I believe people, if they even make small changes, when you have 8 billion people making a small change, imagine if 8 billion people had 2 meals a week that didn't include an animal. It would be an earth-changing decision. And it's not big. Power in numbers.
Jann Arden, can't thank you enough. You can find Jann Arden on her iHeart podcast. You can find her on TV. You can find her on the radio. Sometimes you can find her at her home in Alberta. We were lucky enough to do that today. Jann Arden, thank you.
Thank you, Charles. We'll talk to you soon.
And thank all of you for passing on the word. The Charles Adler podcast, available on Spotify, Apple, anywhere you get your podcasts. I'm Charles Adler, telling you the truth, even though sometimes it's a little bit on the uncomfortable side. But that doesn't make it untrue. Thank you.
Catch Charles Adler Mondays on Real Talk with Ryan Jesperson. Twice a week in the Winnipeg Free Press. And every day at criermedia.co.